The veteran woke to find an orc warrior kneeling at his river, scrubbing crimson paint from her hands with the focused intensity of someone trying to erase more than just color from her skin. Jonathan Voss had been living alone in the wilderness borderlands for 3 years, ever since the war ended, and he could no longer stomach the sight of towns filled with people who expected him to celebrate their victory. His small homestead sat in a valley where 2 streams converged, far enough from civilization that visitors were rare and usually unwelcome. He watched from his cabin window as the orc woman worked methodically, her broad shoulders tense beneath the leather straps of her armor. She had not noticed him yet, or perhaps she simply did not care. The morning light caught the green of her skin, a deep emerald that reminded him of forest shade. Her black hair hung in thick braids down her back, some decorated with carved bone beads that clicked softly as she moved. War paint covered her face in angular patterns, black and red symbols he recognized from battlefield encounters, though he had never learned their meaning. The paint ran in diluted streams into the clear water, turning it murky. Jonathan pulled on his boots and took his walking stick from beside the door. He left his sword where it hung on the wall. If she had come to kill him, she would have done so already. He had learned during the war that orcs did not sneak or deceive when it came to violence. They were brutally honest about their intentions. The grass was wet with dew as he walked down the slope toward the river. His left leg ached as it always did in the morning, a reminder of the spear that had nearly ended his life in the final year of fighting. The orc woman's head turned sharply at his approach, her amber eyes locking onto him with an intensity that would have made most men reach for their weapons. Jonathan simply stopped a respectful distance away and leaned on his stick. She did not speak. Neither did he. They regarded each other, in silence while the river burbled over smooth stones and morning birds called from the pine trees. Her hand had paused in its scrubbing, water dripping from her fingers. He could see now that the paint was everywhere, covering her arms up to the elbows, smeared across her collarbone and throat. She wore the remains of what had been ceremonial armor, leather and metal worked with craftsmanship that spoke of importance within her clan. Jonathan gestured to the river with his free hand, a simple movement that said what words might complicate. "You can stay. Finish what you are doing." The orc woman studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. A human man past his prime, scarred and limping, living alone in the woods like an outcast. Perhaps she saw someone who would understand. She turned back to her work without acknowledging him, but she did not leave. Jonathan took that as answer enough. He made his way upstream a short distance and knelt by the water to fill his bucket. His morning routine continued around her presence. He watered his small vegetable garden, fed the chickens in their coop, checked the snares he had set for rabbits. When he looked toward the river again, she was washing her face, scrubbing at the intricate patterns with something close to desperation. The paint was stubborn. It had been made to last through battle, through sweat and blood and rain. It clung to the creases of her skin, gathered at the base of her small tusks. She worked at it until her green skin looked raw, until the water around her knees ran dark with dissolved pigment. Jonathan watched her frustration build in the set of her jaw, the increasingly aggressive scrubbing. He went into his cabin and found the soap he made from animal fat and wood ash. It was rough stuff, not like the perfumed bars sold in town markets, but it cut through grease and grime better than water alone. When he returned to the riverbank, the orc woman had stopped her scrubbing and sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at her reflection in a calm pool. Jonathan set the soap on a flat rock within her reach and walked away. He did not offer it to her directly, did not say anything that might require her to respond or acknowledge him. He simply left it there and returned to his garden, where the beans needed weeding. The sun climbed higher. Jonathan worked in the steady rhythm he had developed during his years of solitude, letting his mind go quiet while his hands stayed busy. He heard the soft splash of resumed washing from the river. When he glanced over, he saw she had taken the soap and was working it into a lather between her palms. By midday, most of the paint was gone. The orc woman emerged from the river with water streaming from her hair and clothes, her green skin clean except for a few stubborn traces of red in the hollows of her collarbones. She looked smaller without the war paint, younger than he had first assumed. Not a girl, but not far past the threshold of womanhood either. Her armor hung heavy and wet on her frame. She stood on the bank, dripping, looking at his cabin with an expression he could not read. Jonathan had gone inside to escape the noon heat and was stirring a pot of stew over the fire. He ladled some into a wooden bowl and carried it outside, setting it on the porch step along with a piece of flatbread left from breakfast. The orc woman approached slowly, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. Not threatening, just cautious. She looked at the food, then at Jonathan, then back at the food. Her stomach made a sound audible even from several feet away. "Eat," Jonathan said quietly. "No strings attached." She stared at him for a long moment. Her amber eyes were striking against her green skin, intelligent and wary. Then she picked up the bowl and retreated to the edge of the clearing, where she could keep both him and the forest at her back. She ate quickly, efficiently, like someone who had been running on empty for days. Jonathan left her to it and returned inside. He had learned not to push for information, not to demand stories from people who were clearly running from something. The woods attracted those kinds of souls. He was one himself. The afternoon passed in quiet industry. Jonathan repaired a section of fence that had come loose, replaced the straw in the chicken coop, and sharpened his axe for the next round of firewood cutting. The orc woman remained at the edge of his clearing, sometimes watching him work, sometimes staring into the forest as if expecting pursuers. She never went far from the river. As evening approached, Jonathan built up his cooking fire and prepared more food than usual. He made no comment when the orc woman drew closer, attracted by the smell of roasting rabbit and wild onions. He simply filled 2 bowls when it was ready and offered her one. This time she took it without retreating. She sat on the ground near the fire, keeping enough distance to be proper but close enough to feel its warmth. The night air in the mountains grew cold quickly once the sun set. "I am Grushka," she said suddenly, her voice deeper than he expected, with the slight gravel that characterized orc speech. "Daughter of Throck, former shield maiden of the Ironjo clan. Former." That word carried weight. "Jonathan Voss," he replied. "Former lieutenant of the king's 3rd Army." He saw her eyes narrow slightly at that, processing what it meant. They had been enemies once, in the abstract way that soldiers were enemies when their leaders pointed them at each other. "You do not fear me," Grushka said. It was not quite a question. "I have been afraid of orcs before," Jonathan admitted. "During the war, but fear is exhausting and I am tired." He took a bite of his food, chewing thoughtfully. "Besides, if you wanted me dead, I would be dead. You did not come here for violence." Grushka looked into the fire, her expression unreadable. "I came here for water, to wash away what I was. The war paint. The identity." She touched her face, still seeming surprised by the absence of the familiar patterns. "I wore the marks of my clan since I was old enough to raid. They defined me, protected me, made me part of something larger than myself." Jonathan waited, sensing there was more. "I killed a human child," Grushka said flatly. "During a raid 3 days ago, a boy, perhaps 8 summers old. He ran in front of my blade as I fought his father." Her hands tightened on the bowl. "It was an accident. I would not intentionally harm a youngling, but that does not change what happened, does not bring him back. The forest seemed very quiet around them. Jonathan felt the old, familiar weight of war settling on his shoulders again. He knew exactly what she was feeling. The sickness, the wrongness, the moment when you realized you had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "I have killed children too," he said quietly. "Not in direct combat, but I gave orders that led to their deaths. Told my men to burn supplies that villages needed to survive the winter. We called it military necessity, strategic advantage." He set down his bowl, his appetite gone with the memory. "I left the army because I could not carry those orders anymore. Could not pretend they were justified just because someone with a crown said they were necessary." Grushka looked at him with something that might have been recognition. "My clan cast me out when I would not finish the raid, when I laid down my weapons and walked away. They said I was weak, corrupted by human softness. My own father led the vote to exile me. So you washed away the paint. So I washed away everything." She gestured at herself, at the clean green skin unmarked by the symbols of her people. "I do not know what I am now, not a warrior, not a clan daughter. Just Grushka alone." Jonathan poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "Alone is not so bad. Takes time to get used to, but there is a kind of peace in it." "You do not seem at peace," Grushka observed. He smiled without humor. "I am working on it." They sat in silence as the stars emerged overhead. The fire crackled and popped, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out its hunting cry. Jonathan found himself oddly comfortable with her presence, this orc woman who had appeared at his river like something from a dream. They were both exiles, both carrying burdens too heavy to name. "You can sleep in the barn," he offered when the fire burned low. "There is clean straw and blankets. It is dry and warm enough." Grushka studied him with those penetrating amber eyes. "Why do you help me?" "Your people and mine have been enemies for generations." "Maybe that is exactly why," Jonathan said. "Because the war is over and I am tired of having enemies. Or maybe just because you looked like you needed help and I had help to give." He stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting. "Not everything needs a grand reason." She followed him to the barn, a sturdy structure he had built himself from pine logs. Inside, it smelled of hay and the earthy scent of the 2 goats he kept for milk and cheese. He showed her where the blankets were stored and left her a candle. "Thank you," Grushka said as he turned to leave. The words sounded unpracticed in her mouth, as if gratitude was not something her clan had valued. "You are welcome," Jonathan replied simply. That night, lying in his own bed in the cabin, Jonathan found himself thinking about the orc woman in his barn. He knew he should probably be more cautious, more concerned about the potential danger. But he had spent 3 years alone, speaking to no one but the chickens and his own dark thoughts. There was something almost miraculous about having another soul nearby, someone who understood the weight of violent regret. He slept more soundly than he had in months. Morning came with gray light and the smell of rain on the wind. Jonathan woke to find Grushka already up, feeding the chickens with the careful attention of someone unfamiliar with the task, but determined to do it correctly. She had clearly watched him do it the day before, and was attempting to replicate his movements. "They will not bite," he called from the porch, amused by the way she approached the hens like they might be miniature dragons. "They are unpredictable," Grushka countered, scowling as one pecked at her boot. "How do you know what they will do?" "I have been feeding them every day for 3 years. They are very predictable, actually. They eat, they lay eggs, they complain loudly about everything." He came down the steps, still working the stiffness from his leg. "Here, scatter it like this. They prefer it spread out so they do not have to fight over it." He demonstrated, and Grushka imitated his motion. The chickens clucked approvingly and attacked the scattered grain with enthusiasm. "You farm," she said, looking around at his garden and animals with curiosity. "This is what you do now, grow food and tend beasts. It is honest work. No one dies from it. It seems small after leading soldiers," Jonathan shrugged. "Maybe small is what I need. The big, important things never turned out well." He headed toward the garden, where weeds were already reclaiming the spaces between his vegetables. "You are welcome to stay until you figure out where you are going. I can use help with the work if you are willing. I will feed you and give you a safe place to sleep." Grushka followed him, her expression uncertain. "I know nothing of farming. Neither did I when I started. You learn by doing." He handed her a basket. "These are weeds. Pull them out. These are bean plants. Leave them alone. Simple enough." She took the basket and knelt in the dirt beside him. Her hands were large and strong, built for wielding weapons, but she worked carefully to distinguish between the plants he wanted and the ones he did not. They labored in companionable silence while clouds gathered overhead. The rain started just before noon, a gentle, steady drizzle that quickly turned into a downpour. They ran for the cabin, laughing despite themselves at the sudden drenching. Jonathan built up the fire while Grushka stood dripping on the rug, looking around at the interior of his home with open curiosity. It was a simple space, one room with a sleeping area curtained off at the back, a table and chairs, shelves lined with preserved foods and supplies. His few possessions hung on pegs or stored in a trunk. Everything was neat and well maintained, the home of someone who took care with details because there was nothing else to occupy his mind. "This is all yours?" Grushka asked, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it. The cabin was here when I arrived, but I have expanded and repaired, made the furniture, put in the shelves." He handed her a cloth to dry her face. "It keeps me busy. It is good work." She touched the joinery where two beams met, noting the careful craftsmanship. "Strong and well made. Among my people, only the clan builders make things this well. Warriors are not taught such skills." "What are warriors taught?" "To fight, to follow orders, to bring glory to the clan through strength and conquest." She said it without pride, reciting lessons learned long ago. "We are told that building and growing are the work of lesser beings. That taking is more honorable than making." Jonathan stirred the pot of stew hanging over the fire, the same meal he ate most days with small variations. "Do you believe that?" Grushka was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know what I believe anymore. Everything I was taught led me to a moment when my blade cut through a child's neck. If that is glory, I want no part of it." They ate together at the table, rain drumming on the roof above them. Jonathan found himself watching her when he thought she would not notice, taking in the details of her. The way her tusks caught the firelight when she turned her head. The scars on her knuckles and forearms, white against green. The surprising delicacy with which she handled the wooden spoon as if afraid her strength might break it. "Tell me about farming," Grushka said abruptly. "Why do you plant beans?" The question caught him off guard, but he answered. "Beans add nutrients to the soil. They grow quickly and produce a lot of food from a small space. You can dry them and they keep through the winter." "And the other plants?" He found himself explaining his garden in detail, the logic behind what he planted and when, the careful rotation of crops to keep the soil healthy, the constant battle against pests and weather and bad luck. Grushka listened with the intense focus of someone used to studying tactics and strategy, asking sharp questions that made him think about things he usually did by instinct. The rain continued all afternoon and into the evening. They could not work outside, so Jonathan found other tasks. He showed Grushka how to card wool from his goats, preparing it for spinning. She was clumsy at first, her warrior's hands too rough for the fine work, but she persisted with the same determination she had brought to feeding the chickens. "You do not have to be good at everything immediately," Jonathan said gently when he saw her frustration. "Learning takes time." "Warriors who are slow to learn die," Grushka replied, but she relaxed her grip slightly, letting the wool slide through her fingers more naturally. "You are not a warrior anymore, you said so yourself." She stopped moving, her hands still on the wool. "Then what am I? Someone learning to card wool on a rainy afternoon. That is enough for now." Night fell, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. Jonathan made up a pallet by the fire, insisting that Grushka stay inside rather than trudge through the mud to the barn. She protested, but he could see the relief in her eyes. The barn was serviceable, but it was not warm or particularly comfortable. They lay in the darkness, Jonathan in his bed and Grushka by the fire, listening to the storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer. "Jonathan," her voice came quiet through the dark. "Yes. Do you ever stop seeing them? The ones you killed?" He knew exactly what she meant. The faces that came in dreams, in moments of quiet, the weight that never fully lifted. "No," he said honestly, "but it gets easier to carry. Time does not erase it, but you get stronger at bearing the weight. And doing good things, making things grow instead of burning them down, that helps. It does not balance the scales, but it reminds you that you are capable of more than destruction." "I want to believe that." "Then believe it. You are here, are you not, feeding chickens and learning to card wool instead of raiding villages. That is a start." Grushka was silent for a long time, and Jonathan thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she spoke again, so softly he almost missed it. "I am glad I found your river." "So am I," he said, and realized he meant it completely. The rain lasted 3 days. During that time, Grushka became a fixture in Jonathan's routine, helping with every task he could teach her. She learned to milk the goats, though they were suspicious of her at first, bleating nervously at her unfamiliar smell. She learned to preserve vegetables in brine, to churn butter, to patch the holes in his worn shirts with surprising delicacy. Her hands were learning gentleness. They talked more than Jonathan had talked in 3 years. About small things mostly, the tasks at hand, the needs of the animals, the behavior of the weather, but sometimes about larger things. Grushka told him about her clan, about growing up as the daughter of a war chief, expected to be fierce and uncompromising. About the mother she barely remembered, who had died in a raid when Grushka was small. About the foster mothers who had raised her to fight, but never to question. Jonathan told her about his farm childhood, so different from his later life. About joining the army young, looking for adventure and purpose. About rising through the ranks during the war, gaining authority he had never wanted. About the slow erosion of his certainty, the growing horror at what he was being asked to do. "I thought I was serving my king and protecting my people," he said one evening as they shelled beans together. "But the longer the war went on, the more I realized we were just perpetuating violence. Every raid we conducted spawned 3 more in revenge. Every orc we killed had family who would seek retribution. We were locked in a cycle with no winners, only survivors." "My father said the same about humans," Grushka replied. "That you breed too quickly, spread too far, take too much land. That the only way for orcs to survive was to push back with constant force. And look where it brought us both, sitting in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, exiled from our own people." Grushka smiled slightly, an expression that transformed her face. "There are worse places to be." When the rain finally stopped, they emerged to find the world washed clean and bright. Jonathan's garden had thrived in the deluge, plants growing visibly taller. leaves deepening to rich green. They spent the morning weeding and checking for storm damage, working side by side with an easy coordination they had developed during the forced proximity of the rainy days. Grushka had changed in subtle ways. She moved more easily around the homestead, no longer cautious about touching things or uncertain where to step. She hummed sometimes while she worked, a low melodic sound that Jonathan found pleasant. The wariness had not entirely left her eyes, but it had softened. She was learning to relax. Jonathan found himself looking forward to her presence, to the sound of another person moving through his space. The solitude that had once felt necessary now seemed like something he had been enduring rather than choosing. Grushka made the work lighter, the meals more enjoyable, the evenings less empty. He tried not to examine that feeling too closely. She was an orc, someone his people would call enemy even now. Their time together was temporary, a circumstance brought about by mutual exile and chance. She would leave eventually, find her own path. He should not get attached, but attachment was not always a matter of should or should not. A week after Grushka's arrival, Jonathan woke to find her already outside, practicing with a long stick in the clearing. She moved through combat forms, her body flowing from stance to stance with lethal grace. This was what she had been trained for, what her muscles knew better than breathing. She was beautiful and terrible to watch. He stood on the porch, coffee in hand, and simply observed. She noticed him eventually but did not stop, continuing her practice with focused intensity. Sweat gleamed on her green skin despite the cool morning air. "You miss it," Jonathan said when she finally paused, breathing hard. "Yes." Grushka planted the stick in the ground and leaned on it. "I miss the certainty of it, the clarity. In battle, you know exactly what is required of you. There is no ambiguity. Just death. Just purpose." She wiped her face with her arm. "I was good at it, Jonathan. One of the best in my clan. Fighting gave me identity, respect, place. Without it, I am adrift," he finished. "I understand. I felt the same when I left the army, like I had cut away a piece of myself and did not know how to be whole without it." "How did you bear it?" He gestured at the homestead around them. "I built something new, found different purposes. It took time and there were dark days, but eventually the roots took hold." He paused, considering his next words. "You do not have to give up all of what you were. Your strength, your discipline, your skills, they can be used for things other than war. You are still a warrior. You have just changed what you are fighting for." Grushka looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "What would you have me fight for? Life, growth, protection of things worth protecting." He stepped off the porch, moving to stand beside her. "Help me clear the field to the east. I want to plant winter wheat, but there are stumps that need removing. I have been putting it off because it is brutal work for one person, but two, especially with your strength, could manage it." She studied the field he indicated, already calculating approaches and methods. The warrior in her assessing a challenge. "Yes, I can do this." They spent the next several days on the stumps, a combination of digging, chopping, and raw force. Grushka proved as strong as Jonathan had suspected, her orc physiology giving her power that made short work of obstacles he would have struggled with for hours. But she also learned to use tools properly, to apply leverage and technique rather than just brute strength. Working together in the summer heat, they fell into an easy partnership. Jonathan pointed out the most efficient approaches, and Grushka executed them with growing skill. They took breaks in the shade, passing a water skin back and forth, too tired to talk much but comfortable in the shared exhaustion. One afternoon, as they sat beneath a tree catching their breath, Grushka said, "I have never worked beside a human before, only fought against them. What do you think? I think we are not so different in the ways that matter. We sweat the same, tire the same, bleed the same. She flexed her hands, studying new calluses forming across her palms. The scars we give each other look identical. Jonathan nodded slowly. During the war, I tried not to think of orcs as people. It was easier to fight something monstrous than to face someone who might have hopes and fears like mine. But sometimes, I would see things that broke through that illusion. An orc soldier protecting a wounded companion. A war cry that sounded like desperation rather than rage. Moments that reminded me we were all just trying to survive. My people do the same, Grushka admitted. We tell stories of humans as demons, cruel and soulless. We do not speak of your capacity for mercy or love, only your violence. She looked at him directly. You are not what I was taught to expect, neither are you. The air between them felt charged suddenly, heavy with recognition. They were seeing each other truly, past the categories and prejudices, down to the essential truth of two people trying to build meaning from the wreckage of their former lives. Grushka broke eye contact first, standing abruptly. We should finish before the sun sets. They worked until dusk, neither willing to name what had passed between them. That night, Jonathan lay awake long after Grushka's breathing had steadied into sleep by the fire. He was developing feelings for her. He could no longer deny it. The way his heart lifted when she laughed at something unexpected. The comfort of her presence, solid and real in a way that cut through years of numb isolation. The growing desire to reach out and touch her, to trace the line of her jaw or the point of her ear, to discover if her skin was as soft as it looked despite her strength. It was impossible, of course. Even if she felt the same, which he had no reason to assume, they were still human and orc. The taboo went bone deep in both their cultures. Any relationship between them would make her exile permanent and paint a target on his back from both sides. They would be hunted by those who saw their union as betrayal or abomination. And yet his heart did not care about logic or consequence. It wanted what it wanted with the stubborn insistence of water finding its level. He did not know what to do with that. Summer deepened into its fullest bloom. The field was cleared and planted with wheat that sprouted in neat green rows. The garden produced abundantly, and they spent long hours preserving food for winter, salting and pickling and drying. Grushka learned to bake bread, initially burning it more often than not but gradually developing a feel for the oven's temperament. Her face when she pulled out a perfect golden loaf was worth all the charred failures that had come before. They established routines and rhythms. Morning chores done separately, Grushka with the animals while Jonathan tended the garden. Midday work on larger projects together. Afternoons often spent on individual tasks, Grushka practicing her forms or exploring the surrounding woods while Jonathan repaired tools or worked on winter preparations. Evenings together by the fire, talking or working on small projects, companionable and easy. It was a good life, Jonathan thought. Simple and honest, built on effort rather than violence. He had never been happier, even knowing it could not last. The first sign of trouble came on a morning in late summer when Grushka returned from checking the rabbit's snares with tension written across her shoulders. There are tracks, she said without preamble. Orc, multiple individuals, less than a day old. They were scouting, moving in a pattern that suggests searching for something. Jonathan felt his stomach tighten. Your clan, possibly. Or another clan that has heard of my exile and wants to claim glory by finishing what my father started. She paced the cabin, her earlier calm replaced by nervous energy. They are looking for me. I have brought danger to your home. Our home, Jonathan corrected gently, and you did not bring anything. They chose to hunt you. That is their decision, not yours. I should leave, draw them away. Where would you go? You are alone and they are many. He stood, moving to block her path to the door. We face this together or we run together. Those are the options. Grushka looked at him with something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. Why would you risk yourself for me? Because I love you, Jonathan thought, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve better than being hunted like an animal. Because I am tired of watching people I care about face danger alone. You care about me. It was not quite a question, but he answered anyway. Yes, very much. She stepped closer, near enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body, could see the flecks of darker amber in her eyes. I care about you as well, Jonathan Voss, more than is wise, more than I know how to say. His hand moved of its own accord, reaching up to cup her face. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, smooth except for the faint texture of old scars. This is madness, she whispered. We cannot, I know. It would destroy any chance either of us has of returning to our people. I know, we would be hunted, hated, called traitors and worse. I know. He stepped even closer until there was barely space between them. I know all of it, Grushka, and I do not care. I have been alone in the dark for so long, and you are light and warmth and everything I did not know I was starving for. If that is madness, then I choose madness gladly. She opened her eyes, looking at him with desperate hope. You truly mean this, with everything I am. Grushka closed the final distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that was fierce and gentle all at once. Jonathan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, feeling the solid reality of her against him. She was strong and soft simultaneously, her body powerful but her touch tender. She kissed like someone discovering something precious and fragile, like she was afraid it might vanish if she held too tight. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. I have never felt this way, Grushka admitted. Never wanted someone the way I want you, neither have I, not truly. He stroked her hair, marveling at the silky texture of it. I thought I was content with solitude, but I was just hiding. You brought me back to life. They stood entwined for a long moment, simply holding each other before reality reasserted itself. The hunting party, Jonathan said reluctantly. We need a plan. Grushka nodded against his shoulder. They will come here eventually. My tracks lead to this place, and I have made no effort to hide my presence these past weeks. How many in a typical hunting party? 5 to 8 warriors usually, enough to handle an exile without risking too many clan members. Her voice was clinical now, falling back into tactical thinking. They will expect me to be alone and possibly weakened by lack of resources. They will not expect me to have help, especially from a human. Jonathan moved to his weapons, taking down the sword he had not touched in 3 years. It felt wrong in his hand now, too familiar and too foreign simultaneously. I am not the fighter I used to be. My leg will slow me down. You do not need to fight. Grushka caught his hand, stopping him. We could fortify the cabin, make them come to us on our terms. Or we could try to evade them, move deeper into the wilderness where they cannot easily follow. This is my home. I will not abandon it. He met her eyes steadily. But I will not ask you to fight your own people for my sake. If you want to face them alone, try to talk them down. There is no talking to a sanctioned hunting party. They have their orders, and failure would mean their own exile. She squeezed his hand. But I will not leave you to face the consequences of sheltering me. We stand together. Together, Jonathan agreed. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jonathan had no illusions about defeating a war party in open combat, but they could make the homestead defensible. They brought all the animals into the barn and reinforced its doors. They stocked the cabin with water and food, weapons and supplies. Jonathan showed Grushka where he had hidden emergency caches over the years, the habits of a former soldier proving useful. As the sun set, they ate a quiet meal, both aware it might be their last peaceful evening. "Tell me something," Jonathan said as they sat together. "What would you have done if you had not met me? Where would you have gone?" Grushka considered. "I do not know. Into the deep wilderness, perhaps. Tried to live alone until the loneliness or the elements killed me. I had no plan beyond washing away the paint and leaving my old life behind." She smiled sadly. "I was not thinking of the future, only trying to escape the past. I did the same when I came here, ran away without a plan, just desperate to stop being what I had been." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Strange how running away brought us together. Perhaps we were meant to find each other. Perhaps the universe has a sense of humor about these things. Perhaps." They made love that night, tender and urgent, an affirmation of life in the face of potential death. Grushka was strong enough to break him but touched him like something precious. Jonathan mapped every inch of her with his hands and mouth, memorizing the landscape of her body, the places that made her gasp or sigh. They came together with a desperation that was also joy, finding in each other a completion neither had known they were missing. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Jonathan's bed, skin cooling in the night air. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Grushka said quietly, "I want you to know this has been the happiest time of my life. These weeks with you, learning to be something other than a weapon, it has given me hope I did not know was possible." Jonathan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We will survive this. We will have years together, a lifetime. I will not lose you now that I have found you." Such certainty. "Such stubbornness," he corrected with a slight smile. "I am very stubborn about the things I love. You love me completely, impossibly, inconveniently." He pulled her closer. "I love you, Grushka, daughter of Thrak, former shield maiden, current chicken tender and bread baker, all of you." She buried her face against his neck, and he felt wetness that might have been tears. "I love you too, Jonathan Voss. I did not think I was capable of such feeling, but my heart knows you like it knows breathing." They held each other through the night, stealing what peace they could before the storm. Dawn came with fog rolling down from the mountains, thick and obscuring. Jonathan and Grushka were both awake already, armored in their different ways. She had donned her warrior gear, the leather and metal that marked her as Orc clan. He wore the padded jacket and bracers from his soldier days, protection that might turn a blade. They did not have to wait long. The Orc war party emerged from the fog like specters, 6 warriors armed and painted for battle. They moved in formation, disciplined and deadly. At their head walked a massive Orc male whose resemblance to Grushka was unmistakable. Her father. "Grushka," Thrak's voice boomed across the clearing. "You shame yourself, hiding behind a human like a coward. Come out and face your judgment with dignity." Grushka stepped out of the cabin, Jonathan close behind her. She stood tall, showing no fear even though she was outnumbered and facing warriors she had trained beside. "I am no coward, father. I chose a different path than the one you laid out for me. That is not weakness, it is courage." Thrak's eyes narrowed, taking in her clean skin the absence of clan markings. "You have forsaken everything. Your clan, your heritage, your honor, and for what? To live like a farmer. To consort with the enemy, to live without the blood of children on my hands," Grushka shot back. "To build instead of destroy, to find purpose in creation rather than conquest." She gestured at Jonathan. "This man is not my enemy. He is the best person I have ever known. He showed me kindness when I deserved none, taught me skills when he could have turned me away, gave me a future when I thought I had none." One of the other warriors, a female with elaborate braids, spat on the ground. "You have been corrupted, weakened by human lies. You are no longer orc." "I am exactly orc," Grushka countered. "Strong enough to admit when I was wrong, brave enough to change. Those are orc virtues, or have you forgotten them in your rush to glorify violence?" Throck raised his hand, silencing the others. His gaze shifted to Jonathan. "Human. You have harbored an exile, given aid to an enemy of the clans. By our law, that makes you fair target." "By my reckoning," Jonathan said calmly, "I helped a woman in need. If that is a crime, then I am guilty gladly. You cannot protect her. We are 6 to your 2. "Then it will be a fair fight," Jonathan replied with a thin smile. "I have faced worse odds." Throck studied them both, his expression unreadable. Jonathan could see the resemblance to Grushka in his face, the same strong bones, the same amber eyes. This was a warrior of experience and cunning, not some young hothead. He was thinking, calculating. "I do not wish to kill my daughter," Throck said finally. "Even one who has shamed herself. Return with us, Grushka. Undergo the trials of redemption. In time, you may be allowed back into the clan." "What would those trials entail?" Grushka asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Proof of loyalty. Proof of strength. You would be required to kill 10 humans in single combat, bring their weapons as tribute." Throck gestured dismissively at Jonathan. "You could start with this one." "No." The word was flat, final. Throck's expression hardened. "Then you choose exile permanently. You choose to be clanless, nameless, oathless. You will be hunted wherever you go. No orc will give you aid or shelter. You will die alone and unmourned." "I will not be alone," Grushka said, reaching for Jonathan's hand. "And I am not nameless. I am Grushka who chose mercy. Grushka who found a better way. That name will suffice." Something flickered across Throck's face. Pain, perhaps, or anger, or both. "You would truly choose this human over your blood? Over everything I taught you?" "I choose myself," Grushka said. "The self I want to be, not the self you demanded I become. Jonathan is part of that choice, yes, but this is about me, Father. About refusing to keep killing just because it is what I was trained to do." Throck was silent for a long moment. The other warriors watched him, awaiting his signal. Jonathan felt the tension like a physical thing, his hand ready to draw his sword even though he knew how poorly that would end. "I taught you to be strong," Throck said quietly, "to survive in a world that wants us dead. Everything I did was to protect you, to make you too fierce to be destroyed." "You taught me well," Grushka acknowledged. "I am strong enough to stand here and face you. Strong enough to fight for what I believe in. You did not fail me, Father. You just did not see that strength could be used for things other than war." Throck looked at his daughter for a long moment, some internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. Then he turned to his warriors. "We leave." The female warrior protested. "But War Chief, our orders. I said we leave." Throck's voice carried absolute authority. "Grushka has made her choice. She is exiled as decreed, but I will not kill my own daughter for the crime of wanting peace. If that makes me weak, then let the clan find a new war chief." He turned back to Grushka one last time. "You are no longer of the Ironjaw clan. I cannot protect you from other war parties, from those who will see your existence as an insult. You understand this?" "I understand." Throck nodded slowly. "Then live, daughter who is no longer daughter. Live and prove that your new path is worthy of the strength I gave you." His eyes shifted to Jonathan. "Human. If you harm her, if you betray the trust she has placed in you, I will cross mountains and rivers to find you. There will be no mercy." "I would expect nothing less," Jonathan replied, "but you will never have cause. I would die before I hurt her. See that you do not." Throck turned and walked back into the fog, his warriors following. Within moments, they had vanished as completely as if they had never been there. Jonathan and Grushka stood frozen, hardly daring to believe it was over. Then Grushka's knees buckled and Jonathan caught her, holding her up as reaction set in. "He let us live," she whispered. "He actually let us live. Fathers surprise us sometimes," Jonathan said, his own heart racing. "Even orc war chief fathers, apparently." They stood together in the clearing, holding each other as the fog slowly lifted and the sun burned through. The danger had passed for now. But they both knew Throck's warning was real. Other clans, other hunters, they would come eventually. A human and an orc together, it was a story that would spread. A target that some would not be able to resist, but that was a problem for another day. Today they had survived. They had each other. It was enough. The weeks following the confrontation were strange and wonderful. Jonathan and Grushka moved through their routines with a new lightness, the sword of Damocles that had hung over them momentarily lifted. They worked the land together, prepared for winter, and loved each other with the intensity of people who knew their time might be limited. Grushka taught Jonathan to fight properly, correcting the self-taught techniques he had developed during his army days. She was a patient but demanding teacher, pushing him to use his body efficiently despite his bad leg. In return, he taught her to raid, something her warrior upbringing had not included. She attacked literacy the same way she attacked everything, with focused determination. They sat together in the evenings, Grushka sounding out words from Jonathan's small collection of books while he prepared their meal or mended clothes. Her joy when she successfully read an entire sentence unaided was infectious. "Listen," she said one night, pride evident in her voice. The winter came early that year and the harvest was poor. The villagers worried they would not have enough to last until spring. She looked up from the page. "I read it, all of it, correctly." "You did," Jonathan confirmed, smiling. "You are a natural scholar." "Hardly, but I am stubborn." "That too." She set the book aside and moved to sit beside him, curling into his side with easy familiarity. "I never thought I could have this. Peace, companionship, love. It was not part of what I envisioned for my life." "What did you envision?" "Dying in battle, mostly. Going down fighting, taking as many enemies with me as possible. That was the glorious end for a warrior." She looked around the cabin at the life they had built. "This is better. Quieter, but better." Jonathan kissed the top of her head. "I am glad you think so. Though I worry what happens when winter truly sets in. We will be trapped in close quarters for months." "You say that like it is a hardship." "Fair point. Winter did come, fast and hard. The first snow fell in late autumn, and within weeks the world was buried in white. They had prepared well, the cabin stocked with food and firewood, the animals sheltered and warm. The days shortened, and they adapted their routines to the darkness. Trapped inside by the weather, they talked endlessly. Grushka told stories of orc culture, the intricate honor codes and tribal politics, the legends and heroes of her people. Jonathan shared what he knew of human history, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the philosophical debates that shaped his culture. They argued sometimes, their different perspectives clashing, but always with respect and curiosity. On the longest night of winter, they held a ceremony of their own making. Neither came from a culture that would recognize their union, so they created their own ritual. By firelight, they spoke vows to each other, promises of loyalty and love, witnessed only by the crackling flames and the sleeping animals. "I vow to stand by you in all seasons," Jonathan said, holding both her hands in his. "To support your strength and guard your vulnerability. To build a life with you that honors both our peoples, even if neither people honor us. I choose you, Grushka, today and all days." Grushka's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "I vow to protect what we have built together, to use my strength in service of life rather than death." to love you fiercely and gently in the way you deserve to be loved. I choose you, Jonathan, now and always." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and if no law recognized their marriage, it did not matter. They knew what they were to each other. That was enough. The winter was long but not lonely. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies with increasing familiarity. They worked on projects together, carving wooden utensils and tools, preparing for the spring planting. They read books aloud, played simple games with carved pieces, and told stories to pass the endless dark hours. Grushka grew softer in subtle ways, some of the hard edges worn smooth by safety and affection. She laughed more readily, teased Jonathan with playful wit, sang orc songs while she worked. Jonathan found himself lighter too, the shadows that had haunted him for years finally receding. They were healing each other without even trying. Spring arrived with melting snow and mud that turned the clearing into a swamp. They ventured out as soon as they could, eager for fresh air and sunlight after the confinement of winter. The animals were equally restless, the goats bounding around their pen like young things despite their age. They were repairing the fence around the garden when the second orc party appeared. This one was different from the first, warriors from a clan Grushka did not recognize. They wore paint in patterns she identified as the Black Skull tribe, notorious for their brutality even among orcs. There were 8 of them, all male, all heavily armed. They did not announce themselves or parley. They simply attacked. Jonathan had only a heartbeat of warning, the glint of sunlight on metal, before a spear embedded itself in the fence post beside his head. He dropped and rolled, coming up with his sword drawn from pure instinct. Grushka roared a warning and met the first attacker head-on, her axe appearing in her hands as if by magic. She fought with all the skill of her warrior training, enhanced by desperation. These orcs had come to kill them both, and she would not go down easily. Jonathan fought like a man possessed, the old soldier reflexes taking over. His leg screamed at him, but he ignored it, focusing on staying alive, on protecting Grushka. He was outmatched in strength and speed, but he had experience and cunning. He used the terrain, the fence posts and garden stones, anything that might give him an edge. An orc blade opened a cut along his ribs, hot pain that he could not stop to assess. He struck back, his sword finding the gap in his attacker's armor. The orc went down, and Jonathan spun to face the next threat. Grushka was holding off 3 attackers simultaneously, her movements a deadly dance. But she was tiring, slowing just slightly. One of the orcs got through her guard and slammed an axe handle into her temple. She staggered, and Jonathan felt his heart stop. He threw himself across the distance between them, his sword intercepting the killing blow meant for Grushka's exposed neck. The impact jarred his entire arm, but he held firm, pushing the attacker back with strength born of terror. "Together," he gasped to Grushka as she shook off the blow and regained her footing. "Together," she agreed. They fought back to back, protecting each other's blind spots, moving in unconscious coordination. Jonathan had never fought beside an orc before, but Grushka anticipated his movements like they had trained together for years. When he went low, she went high. When she needed space, he gave it. They were a unit, functioning as one. The Black Skull warriors were skilled, but they had not expected such fierce resistance. They had thought to find an exile, weakened and alone. Instead, they found 2 fighters defending something worth dying for. One by one, the attackers fell or withdrew, wounded and reconsidering the wisdom of their hunt. The last warrior, larger than the rest and clearly the leader, faced Jonathan directly. He was fresh while Jonathan was bleeding from multiple wounds and barely standing. The orc's smile showed too many teeth. "Your human will die first," he said to Grushka in her own language, which Jonathan had learned enough of to understand. "You will watch him bleed out before I take your head." Grushka moved to intercept, but she was on the wrong side, too far away. The orc's blade descended in an arc meant to split Jonathan from shoulder to hip. Jonathan did not try to block or dodge. Instead, he stepped in, closer than close, inside the arc of the swing. His sword went up and in, finding the gap beneath the orc's ribs, angling for the heart. It was a killing stroke, one he had performed too many times during the war. His body knew the motion even if his mind had tried to forget. The orc leader looked surprised as he fell, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground. Jonathan stepped back, his sword red, and watched the light fade from his enemy's eyes. The remaining Black Skull warriors fled, unwilling to continue a fight that had cost them so dearly. Jonathan and Grushka stood in the wreckage of their garden, surrounded by bodies, both breathing hard. "You are hurt," Grushka said, her hands already reaching for him, assessing his injuries with a warrior's practiced eye. "So are you," Jonathan pointed out. Blood ran from the cut on her temple and she was favoring her left side. "Inside. Now." Grushka half carried him to the cabin, her strength flagging but still sufficient. She laid him on the bed and began stripping away his torn and bloody clothes, revealing the extent of his wounds. The cut on his ribs was deep, but not fatal. There were other injuries, a slash across his thigh, a puncture in his shoulder, numerous bruises and smaller cuts. Grushka worked with efficient speed, cleaning and binding his wounds with strips of clean cloth. "You could have died," she said, her voice shaking. "That last warrior, you should not have been able to kill him. You were too injured, too slow. But I did kill him, because I had something to live for, someone to protect." Jonathan caught her hand, stilling her frantic movements. "We survived, Grushka, both of us. That is what matters." She leaned her forehead against his, careful of their injuries. "I cannot lose you. I know we live on borrowed time, that more will come, but I am not ready to let you go. I may never be ready." "Then we fight," Jonathan said simply. "We defend our home, we survive. And when we cannot survive anymore, we go down together. But not today. Today we patch each other up and keep living." They spent the next several days recovering, their bodies healing while they reinforced their defenses. Jonathan taught Grushka the tricks he knew for making a location defensible, and she added her own tactical knowledge. They built barriers, created fallback positions, stocked weapons at strategic points. It was a strange life they were building, equal parts farm and fortress. But it was theirs, and they defended it fiercely. The attacks continued sporadically over the following year. Sometimes orc war parties, sometimes human bounty hunters who had heard rumors of a traitor harboring an orc. Jonathan and Grushka fought them all off, their skills and coordination improving with each encounter. They took wounds and gave them, protected their home with everything they had. Between the attacks, they farmed and built and loved. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room. They acquired more animals, chickens and pigs and even a cow. The homestead grew, becoming something more substantial, more permanent. Travelers occasionally stumbled across their hidden valley, lost or seeking shelter. Jonathan and Grushka helped them without hesitation, feeding them and offering a place to rest before sending them on their way. Most were shocked to find a human and orc living together peacefully. But Jonathan's calm hospitality and Grushka's obvious kindness usually overcame their prejudice. Some left still suspicious, but others departed thoughtful, carrying stories of the unlikely couple in the mountains. Those stories spread. Slowly, carefully, their reputation shifted from traitors to something more complex. The human veteran who chose peace. The orc warrior who laid down her weapons. Some called them fools. Others called them brave. A few called them hope. 2 years after Grushka had first appeared at his river, Jonathan was working in the expanded garden when he saw a small group approaching. He tensed, hand going to the knife at his belt, but relaxed when he recognized the banner they carried. Throck's clan symbol. The orc warchief himself led the group, older and grayer than Jonathan remembered, but still powerful. Beside him walked a human man in simple traveling clothes, weathered and middle-aged. They were talking as they walked, not like enemies, but like individuals engaged in cautious negotiation. Grushka emerged from the cabin, saw her father, and froze. Jonathan moved to stand beside her, a unified front. Throck stopped at a respectful distance and raised his hand in greeting. "Daughter who is no longer daughter, and the human who loves her, I come in peace." "Why?" Grushka asked bluntly. The human man stepped forward. "Because the world is changing. Because enough blood has been spilled. Because 2 stubborn people living in a mountain valley have shown us another way might be possible." He looked between Jonathan and Grushka. "I am Marcus Aldridge, representing a coalition of human villages along the border. We have been speaking with Warchief Throck about a truce." Jonathan felt Grushka's sharp intake of breath. A truce. Actual peace negotiations. It seemed impossible. "The war has bled both our peoples dry," Throck said. "The young die while the old men make glory speeches." But recently, travelers have brought stories of a place where human and orc live together, work together, defend each other. He looked at Grushka with something that might have been pride. "Stories of my daughter who was brave enough to stop fighting." "You hated that I left," Grushka said, confusion evident in her voice. "You cast me out." "I did, because I could not see past what I had always known. But 2 years of watching more young warriors die for a conflict none of us remember starting has changed my thinking. If my own daughter could find a better way, perhaps we all can." Marcus Aldridge nodded. "We cannot promise this will be easy. There are hardliners on both sides who will resist any peace. But we are trying to build something new, a framework for coexistence. And we need examples, proof that humans and orcs can live beside each other without violence." "You want to use us," Jonathan said flatly, "as symbols." "As pioneers," Marcus corrected. "As evidence that a different future is possible, will you help us?" Jonathan looked at Grushka, and she looked back at him. They had built their life together in hiding, protecting themselves from a world that hated what they represented. Now that same world was asking them to step into the light. "What would you need from us?" Grushka asked carefully. "Your story, your presence at negotiations, testimony about how you have made this work." Throck's expression was serious. "It will be dangerous. You will have targets on your backs from those who oppose peace. But you already live that way. This would give it purpose beyond mere survival." Jonathan thought about all the people he had killed during the war, all the orders he had given that had led to suffering and death. He had spent years trying to atone through simple living, through building rather than destroying. But perhaps this was another kind of atonement. A chance to use what he and Grushka had created to prevent others from walking the same bloody path. "We will help," he said. Grushka nodded her agreement. "But we do this together. We do not separate or compromise what we have built here." "Agreed," Marcus said. "Together, you are more powerful than either of you alone. That is precisely what we need to demonstrate." The next months were a whirlwind. Jonathan and Grushka traveled to border towns and orc clan meetings, telling their story over and over. They demonstrated what cooperation looked like, how differences could be bridged through respect and common purpose. It was exhausting and often frightening, standing before hostile crowds and asking them to consider peace. But slowly, incrementally, things began to change. Treaties were drafted. trade agreements established. A few brave souls on both sides followed Jonathan and Grushka's example, forming tentative friendships across the species divide. There were setbacks, attacks by extremists on both sides, negotiations that collapsed into shouting matches. Moments when it seemed the whole fragile structure would come crashing down. But Jonathan and Grushka persisted, their relationship proof that the seemingly impossible could become everyday reality. 3 years after Grushka had washed the war paint from her skin at Jonathan's river, they stood together in a neutral meadow and watched as human and orc leaders signed a formal peace accord. It was not perfect. Many issues remained unresolved, but it was a beginning, a foundation to build on. That night, they returned to their homestead, to the life they had created in the mountains. The cabin waited for them, warm and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where a fire burned in the hearth. Their animals greeted them with familiar sounds. The garden they had planted together grew lush in the summer evening. "We did it," Grushka said, standing in the clearing and looking around at their home. "We actually did it. We survived," Jonathan agreed. "We built something good. We helped change the world at least a little." She turned to him, her green skin beautiful in the golden light, her amber eyes soft with love. "Do you regret any of it? The exile, the isolation, the fighting?" Jonathan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her, earth and smoke and something uniquely Grushka. "Not for a single moment. Everything led me to you. Every choice, every hardship, every mile I walked brought me to the day you appeared at my river and washed away your old life. I would walk through fire for that moment again." "You are sentimental," Grushka said, but she was smiling. "I am in love," Jonathan corrected. "There is a difference." They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, a wolf howled and a night bird called out its territory. The world turned on its axis, and somewhere, former enemies were learning to live together, inspired by two people who had chosen love over hate. Inside the cabin, they ate a simple meal and talked about their plans for the coming season. They would expand the garden again, maybe build a proper barn for the growing number of animals. Travelers still came occasionally, seeking the famous couple who had bridged the divide, and they wanted to be able to offer better hospitality. "I have been thinking," Grushka said as they cleaned up after dinner. "About children." Jonathan's hands stilled in the wash water. "Children, is it possible, between human and orc?" She looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. "I do not know if our peoples can create life together or if it is even something you want, but I find myself hoping." Jonathan dried his hands and took hers, pulling her down to sit beside him by the fire. "I do not know if it is possible either, but I want it. I want children with you, a family that combines the best of both our peoples. Even if it does not work, I want to try." Grushka leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I would want such things. Warriors do not dream of babies and family, but you have made me want a future, Jonathan. Made me believe in tomorrow. Then we will build that future together," he promised. "Whatever it holds." The fire crackled, and outside the night deepened. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of war. 6 months later, Grushka placed Jonathan's hand on her still flat stomach and told him she was pregnant. They had not known it was possible, had hoped but not expected. The joy on both their faces could have lit the entire valley. The pregnancy was difficult, complicated by the unprecedented nature of a half-human, half-orc child. They traveled to the nearest village with a midwife, an elderly woman who had delivered hundreds of babies, but never anything like this. She examined Grushka with careful thoroughness and declared that while unusual, The pregnancy seemed to be progressing normally. "The child will be unique," the midwife said. "Neither fully human nor fully orc. You must prepare for that, for the challenges they will face in a world still learning to accept difference." "We know," Jonathan said, holding Grushka's hand. "But we will teach them to be strong, to be kind, to build bridges instead of walls." "Then they will be fortunate in their parents," the midwife replied with a smile. Grushka grew with the changing seasons, her body adapting to carry their child. Jonathan fussed over her, bringing her water and comfortable cushions, worrying when she pushed herself too hard. She tolerated his concern with amused patience, continuing to work until her body demanded rest. They prepared a nursery in the second room, carving a cradle from pine wood and sewing blankets from soft wool. Grushka sang orc lullabies while she worked, songs her mother had sung to her before death claimed her. Jonathan told stories of his own childhood, the gentle moments before war had reshaped his world. The baby came on a spring morning, arriving with the same determination that characterized both parents. The midwife had come to stay with them the week before, and she guided Grushka through the labor with steady calm. Jonathan held his wife's hand and offered what support he could, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. When their daughter finally emerged, slippery and squalling, both parents wept. She was perfect, green-skinned like her mother but with softer features. Small tusks were already visible, delicate as carved ivory. Her eyes, when they opened, were the same amber as Grushka's but with flecks of Jonathan's brown. "She is beautiful," Grushka breathed, cradling the infant against her chest. "Our daughter is beautiful." "She is a miracle," Jonathan agreed, touching the baby's tiny hand and marveling when strong fingers wrapped around his. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, trying to find something that honored both their cultures. Grushka wanted something that would help their daughter fit in either world, a bridge between species made flesh. "Hope," Grushka said softly. "In the human tongue, hope, and in my language, Threka, which means new beginning. Hope Threka Vas." "Hope Threka Vas," Jonathan repeated, testing the sound of it. "Yes, that is perfect." Word of the baby's birth spread quickly through both human and orc communities. Some were horrified, calling the child an abomination. But others saw what Jonathan and Grushka saw, proof that the two species could create life together, not just take it. Hope became a symbol, whether they wanted her to be or not. Visitors came to see the baby, curious or supportive or simply wanting to witness history. Jonathan and Grushka welcomed them all with cautious hospitality, showing that their daughter was not a monster, but simply a child, deserving of love and protection like any other. Throck traveled from his clan to meet his granddaughter, his expression unreadable as he looked down at the infant. Hope stared back at him with serious amber eyes, unafraid. "She has your mother's look," Throck said to Grushka. "The same fierce spirit in her gaze." "She will need that spirit," Grushka replied. "The world will not be easy for her." "No, but she has you and the human to guide her. And perhaps by the time she is grown, the world will have changed enough to welcome her." Throck touched the baby's cheek with surprising gentleness. "I am proud of you, daughter, proud of what you have built and what you have created. I was wrong to cast you out." Grushka's eyes filled with tears. "You came back. That is what matters." "I came back," Throck agreed. "And I will ensure my clan knows this child is under my protection. Any who threaten her will answer to me." It was not a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Grushka had her father back, and Hope had a grandfather who would defend her against those who could not see past their prejudice. The years that followed were full and rich. Hope grew strong and quick, exhibiting the best traits of both her parents. She had orc strength and resilience combined with human adaptability and curiosity. Jonathan and Grushka raised her with love and clear boundaries, teaching her to be proud of her mixed heritage while aware of the challenges it presented. Other mixed couples began to appear, inspired by Jonathan and Grushka's example. The peace held, though imperfectly, with occasional flare-ups of violence from extremists on both sides. But the foundation they had helped build proved stronger than the forces trying to tear it down. Jonathan's homestead became a gathering place, a neutral ground where humans and orcs could meet and interact without the weight of history crushing down on them. He and Grushka hosted festivals and meetings, created spaces for dialogue and understanding. Their home, once a place of exile and hiding, transformed into a beacon of what could be on quiet evenings when hope was asleep and the work was done. Jonathan and Grushka would sit by the river where they had first met. The water ran clear and cold, washing away the dust of the day, renewing itself endlessly. "You remember the first morning?" Jonathan asked one such evening, his arm around Grushka's shoulders. "When I found you washing off the war paint." "I remember thinking you would kill me," Grushka admitted. "Or turn me away at the very least. I was not expecting kindness." "I was not expecting you," Jonathan replied. "But from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you." Two souls tired of fighting, looking for a different way. "We found it together. We did." He kissed her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "I love you, Grushka, more with each passing year. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "And you are mine," she said simply. "My heart, my home, my hope." They sat in peaceful silence, watching the water flow past, carrying the old away and bringing the new forward. Behind them in the cabin, their daughter slept safely. Around them, the world they had helped reshape continued its slow, imperfect progress toward peace. It was not the life either of them had planned or expected. But it was theirs, built from courage and compassion, from the willingness to see past difference to the common humanity, the common personhood that connected all thinking beings. The orc girl had knelt at his river and washed away her old life, and in doing so had found a new one. They both had. And in the years that followed, they helped countless others find new lives as well, building bridges where walls had stood, creating hope where despair had reigned. As the stars emerged overhead and the night sounds of the forest rose around them, Jonathan and Grushka held each other close. Two people who had defied the world to be together, and in doing so, had changed it forever.